So welcome to this video series in which we're going to be looking at the Flask Python framework and how to make a beautiful website in Flask. In this video series we're going to assume absolutely nothing, so it would be good if you've done some Python, say in school or in your own learning, but we are going to start from scratch. Now, believe it or not, in just a few lessons, so think of each video that you watch as a lesson, you're going to learn about the Python and Flask framework, how to set it up. You're going to learn about Bootstrap and mobile optimized websites, how to actually make them, including looking at HTML and CSS. We're also going to look at the back end. So remember, every website has a front end and a back end. We're going to do it all with HTML and CSS in the front end and Flask and Python in the back end. What makes it even better in this coronavirus age is that we're going to do everything using a memory stick. So I'm going to teach you how to install Python and Flask and everything you need on your memory stick so you can take it with you and you don't have to worry about existing dependencies or whatever you have on your machine. So in this video series, we're going to be making a simple website, so to speak, but it's going to teach you everything you need to know to get started with something more complex. And it's going to be called the big questions. And we're going to be looking at the question, the meaning of life. So what is the meaning of life? Something we'll talk about as we go along as well. Now, the website will look like this. It'll have a beautiful Bootstrap little navigation bar. So you click on About and you go to the About page. Nothing much here, but you can see that this is basically a fully functional Bootstrap mobile optimized web page. You click back on the home page. You can also click on that little button there. It takes you to a form which you fill in, and you can actually write something to the database. And when you write something to the database, it would then be displayed back on the screen. So that's something we're aiming for, and very quickly you'll have this up and running. Now, just a quick word about Python and Flask. I want you to be really inspired about what you're learning and know that it is really relevant. It's going to really set you apart from everyone else. So a quick word about Python. First of all, we're on Teach Yourself Python. It was created, it's a relatively new language as compared to many high-level languages. I'm not going to attempt to pronounce his name, but Van Rossum, he created it sort of over Christmas, but it is now incredibly popular, so powerful, so fast, and it's used predominantly in AI, artificial intelligence, machine learning, but you can also create games with it. And what we're doing today, of course, is websites. So if you haven't yet created a website and all you've done is sort of been coding in Python and it just looks very boring, well, this is where Flask comes in. So Flask, this is their actual official site and their documentation. You should bookmark it and keep referring back to it. If there's something doesn't work in a tutorial, likely you'll find the answer here. So they refer to Flask as a micro framework, but they also clarify that the word micro doesn't mean lacking in functionality or power. It's an incredibly powerful framework which allows you to do all kinds of things, and what says it all is companies like Netflix, Dropbox, LinkedIn, they use a range of different, obviously, software and languages, but also among them Flask. So something to look forward to there. Python and Flask, really worthwhile learning these two things, which we're going to get into now. So we're going to get started with 8 easy steps, and you can see them for reference on your screen. They're going to be taken one by one, assuming absolutely no knowledge. And remember, you're going to have to do everything on a memory stick. You don't have to, but I'm going to be doing it on a memory stick, so if you want to follow along, you can do that. So get a cup of coffee, if that's what you drink, or tea, and let's begin. And we're going to start with downloading Python, the latest version of Python, putting it on your memory stick. And as you see, by step 5, which will be here very quickly, you can be installing Flask. So what we're going to do now is actually download Python. Very simple. You just, in Google, type in Python. You come up to the official website, which is python.org, and click on hover over downloads. You can keep it really simple, download the default 32-bit installer by just clicking on that. So if I just click on that, you'll see what happens in a minute. And if you have additional requirements, if you want to go for the 64, or if you have a Mac, simply click on view the full list of downloads down there and click on the latest release version, scroll down and keep going until you see the files, and then you can find the file that is most suitable to your spec and your operating system. So for instance, I might have gone for this one, which is the 64 executable installer, but it's fine. I've downloaded that, and the file that I've just downloaded is now in my downloads folder. So here I am in my downloads folder. Just navigate to it and you should be able to see your application, your Python file that you've just downloaded. I'm going to actually cut it, and you can put it into your memory stick. So whatever your memory stick is, mine happens to be HP4. What I did was I made a little folder. So remember, just in case you're not sure of how to make a folder, you just right click new folder, call it Python install. It doesn't have to, it can be called anything, and inside that you just add, you paste in, or you Control V in your downloaded Python executable. So give that a minute. Once that's done, you can see I've already done this, so I'm just sort of repeating the process for you, but once that's done, you double click on this and the process is really straightforward. It's going to give you the option to install. You keep everything as default, except for there's one little thing that I'm going to point out that you absolutely must do, which is going to save you from many problems and issues later. So let's have a look at that. So assuming you've now downloaded Python, or you're in the process of downloading Python, the one thing I said to look out for is this. At some point, it might look different to you, depending on whatever machine you're using, but you might be asked to check a little box where it says add Python to path. Now, for instance, it might look something like this. Can you see down here? It says add Python to path. Don't worry at this point what that means, but please make sure you check it. Everything else will be checked for you, and you can leave the settings as default, however they are. But this particular one will not be checked, most likely, so please check it and then proceed and install Python. It'll install a whole bunch of files on your memory stick or your desktop, wherever you're installing it, and it will also install pip, which we're going to come to later. So you've set up Python, you've got it installed on your memory stick or desktop, and now we come to step 2, which is really exciting. Now some of you have probably come across the command prompt, or you've seen these movies, or coders coding in the command prompt, and it seems completely confounding. Well, it's extremely simple, and what we're going to do now is introduce you to the command prompt, how to get it running, what it is, some basic commands, and obviously this is something that you're really going to have to really work with as you're coding in Flask and making them. So hopefully what you can see behind me is my desktop. It's going to look different to you, but on a typical Windows desktop you should be able to find some sort of search facility and type in CMD and find what's called your command prompt. Press enter and you come up with this lovely command prompt screen. Now I'm going to demonstrate to you the beauty and the speed of command prompt, and you're going to be using it for all kinds of things, but also for making directories, for going into directories, for running a server. So let's have a look. Now at the moment, if you wanted to make a folder on your desktop, you would need to actually right click on your desktop. Let's close command prompt. I right click, I go new. Think about how slow this is, and I type in my slowly created folder, and I've made a folder on my desktop. Now you can do exactly the same thing using the command prompt, and look at this. Watch the screen over here and see what happens. So I just type in literally, well, first of all I need to be on my desktop. So let's look at that. Now I could change the directory. I'm in the C drive right now. So I could change directory. CD stands for change directory, and type in desktop. And I'm now on my desktop, but I'm in the command prompt. So let's prove that. So I'm going to type in make mkdir, which stands for make directory, make folder. And I'm going to say make quick folder. and instantly you can see over here has popped up a folder. Now you can actually get into that folder without clicking in it, so you can just go cd, which is change directory, quick folder, and now you can see that I'm actually in that quick folder. How can I prove that I'm in it? Well, you could make another directory and I could say wonderful folder. Let's check. If I click in quick folder, you can see that I've made a wonderful folder inside the quick folder. So this is hugely useful. You can see it's very quick, and all really true programmers will use the command prompt. Now, another way to get into it, which is very useful, took me many months to learn this, and I wish I knew it at the beginning, let me show you this, is to actually go into the folder that you want to open. So say you were working in this folder, which is where all your Flask files were. You can actually click in it, click over here at the top, and sort of highlight the directory path, delete it, and type in cmd. And what it does is it opens up the command prompt window in that particular folder. So that's something to just be aware of. I would also say just one simple command. You can type in help and you can see all the different commands. You can type in cls, which clears the screen, and you can type in dir, which tells you what's in that directory. So at the moment there's nothing in the directory, but if I make a little like text folder called readme and I go back and I say dir, it tells me that there's a readme text file in the folder. So we've played around with the command prompt, and we're now going to move on to step 3, which is just using the command prompt to make your folder structure on your USB stick or desktop, wherever you're doing this, and then to make what's called a virtual environment. So creating a folder is going to be really straightforward. With the information that I've given you about command prompt, you just make a folder, and into that folder you're going to be making a virtual environment. Now you might want to look this up, and these are the steps on the screen if you want to pause it and type these out once you've watched the video. The virtual environment is basically, you can think about it as a sort of bubble inside in which all your Django or your Flask project or whatever you're doing will live. Now, it keeps them safe, it's good practice, it means that if you transfer them, there's not going to be any issues with what's called dependencies. Some of this is going to confuse you now, don't worry too much, just think of it like a bubble that you're creating and you're working inside that little virtual environment, which is going to keep everything together and safe and organized. So we're going to look at steps 3 and 4 now, which is making a folder using command prompt and then creating a virtual environment. So I'm back on my desktop and I'm just going to open up the command prompt again, and this time we want to set up, remember if you're doing it on your desktop you can just navigate to your desktop using the command prompt. I'm just going to go into my USB stick, which happens to be, I think it's the E or F drive, I think in this case. So I just type in F and you can see that now I'm in the F drive. Now I'm going to get it open alongside so you can see what's happening. So if I go down there, there's my F drive. I've got 2 Python installations, which is a bit silly, but let's leave it there for now. So in the F drive, I would like to make a folder. Right, let's just call it my folder. Now, again, you can call it anything you like. Just having a look up there. So, sorry, it's make directory my folder, and you can see that it's made a folder for me over here. Now, inside this folder, I'm going to cd, which is change directory, inside that folder. I'm now inside that folder. I'd like to make what I said was going to be a virtual environment. Now for now, you're just going to follow the steps. You're just going to type them out, and this is what's going to create for you a virtual environment inside that folder. Let's open the folder, see what's happening as we do it. And in here, you're going to type in, but first let's just type in Python // with a version to tell us what version we're working with. We happen to be working with 3.7.3. Useful for you to remember that. It might come in handy later. What we're now going to do is you're going to type in this command, which you can go back to the PowerPoint and pause the screen if you need to do it all at once. So Python 3, and you're going to type in venv env. Right. The next command you type in is this. All of this information you can get from the Flask documentation site, which is online and available to everyone. Now, as soon as we've done that little command there, you see that it's created an environment. So this is your virtual environment. You don't need to go into it or know what it's doing, just know that it's there. Okay. So it's going to take a while because it's downloading all kinds of files into that environment. Now, we're not actually in the virtual environment yet. So there's a step that you're going to have to remember whenever you come back to Flask or come back to work with this, is that you're going to have to get back into this folder and then activate the virtual environment. And I'll show you how that's done once this finishes. So you can see that's happened. You can double click and see there's a whole bunch of files. Just ignore them. They're there. You have your virtual environment. The step that you really need to remember, because you're going to be doing it again and again, is you're in your folder. You need to now activate your virtual environment. In other words, you need to actually be working inside it. So how do you do that? You just type in env /scripts activate. And what that does, it doesn't look like it's done anything, but you can see this little env in brackets there. Now this means that you're working. Everything inside your folder, everything that you're doing now, you're doing inside the virtual environment. So that's brilliant. It's all set up as it should be, and I'm going to show you how to get back into this in case you forget that that's your virtual environment which has been set up. Now once you've done that, we need to go on to the next step, which is simply to install Flask. And that's so simple because we already have pip installed as part of Python. You just type in pip install Flask. And as long as you're connected to the internet, what it's going to do is it's going to pull all the Flask files, the latest version, the latest release, and it's going to install it in this virtual environment. Now we're getting much, much closer. Literally in a few minutes anyway, you're going to have Flask installed and you're going to actually look at your browser and you're going to see something being displayed on it. So we're getting much closer. We've installed Flask, which is step 5, and step 6 is just something you could try. You could pause the screen. If you're having some sort of errors, type in import Flask, see what happens there, and then we're going to move on to step 6. Now step 6 is just setting up a project folder. This is going to be for all your website files, so you can call it anything you like. This is what I'm going to call it. So you can see inside my memory stick, right next to my virtual environment, I'm going to make a little project folder called My Flask Project. Inside that project, I'm going to make a Python file, and we're going to start coding now. So this is my Python file, which is inside that Flask folder, and let's show you how that's done. Now in this bit, we're actually going to start some Python coding. You can use any IDE that you like. In fact, you can just use the actual idle Python, but I use what's called Sublime Text, which is beautiful, and you can use the free version. So if you want to download Sublime Text, just download it from the site, and let's get started. So I open up Sublime Text, and what I'm going to do is open up the folder that I've just created. So actually, I haven't created it, so let's go back into my, remember that's my virtual environment, and I'm going to make my Flask folder. So this is going to be where all my Flask files and my website is going to live in here. So remember, that's inside my folder, and you can call these things whatever you like. So I'm in there. I'm going to open up this folder in Sublime Text. So I'm going to say open folder, navigate into my correct folder there. Oops, I'm just going to select the folder and say select folder, and it opens it up. Now, the first thing you need to do is make a Python file. And this is going to be, when you're going to get more advanced and you're working with much bigger files, you're going to organize things slightly differently. But for now, we're going to have one file. Most of it is going to be put in there. And as the name of our website is going to be called Big Questions, I'm just going to call it Big Questions. So I right-click, New File, go File, Save As. Now I'm going to save this in my Flask folder, and I'm going to call it bigquestions.py. Now remember, I'm making a Python file, hence the extension .py. So this is where it's all going to start making sense, and we're going to actually start coding in Python. So assuming you have some basic knowledge of Python, you know that that is just a comment. This is our bigquestions.py file, so that's not part of the program. And we're going to start by typing in from Flask, import Flask. And all we're doing is we're importing what's called the Flask class even. So hopefully you've learned a little bit about object-oriented programming and inheritance. If not, don't worry too much, it'll be quite intuitive. So from Flask, import Flask. Make sure that's a capital. Yeah. We're then going to create an app, so we can type app equals Flask. Now this is a double underscore name. And here what we're doing is we're setting the app variable to the instance of a Flask class. Don't worry too much again, but just type this out. You'll get used to it because you're going to be using it again and again. And down here, now this is the exciting bit, I'm going to create what's called a route or route. I never know what to call it, so a route, okay? And this is basically referring to the URLs that you're going to see in your browser. So this will make sense in a minute, so just type that in for now. And I could type in a little function, let's call it hello world, let's keep it really simple. And I'm going to return a little, let's say h1 tag if you've done some basic HTML. This is just a little heading. And I'm going to write hello world. Here we are. Okay, so let's see what happens here. And actually, the name of our website is Big Questions, so let's call it Big Questions. Oops. Helps if you can type. Okay, now what's going to happen is I'm going to save this, and we then need to actually run the server to see what's happening. So you've got to remember your command prompt. We're going to get back into that again, and we're going to run the Flask server. So let's have a look at how that is done. So you're going to have to get back into command prompt. Remember, we're going back into the E drive, so or I think it's the F drive in my case. I want to go into my folder, which is where my virtual environment is, and then I want to activate the virtual environment by typing this command. So I'm now in my virtual environment, which is great. I want to navigate into my, what was it called? My Flask folder, I think it was called, so let's just verify that. It was called my Flask folder, that's it. So I'm going to go into my Flask folder where I have my Big Questions Python files, so cd my Flask folder. I'm now in that, and now I want to actually run that file to see what happens. So what I'm about to do now is a series of steps. It might seem confusing, but once you've set it up, it's all done, and you're going to be repeating these commands again and again such that it'll just become second nature to you. So what you need to type, this is on Windows, you would need to look up the associated commands for Mac, is you're going to type in set flask app, all capitals, equals, and the name of the Python file. So in my case, what was it called? Big Questions. So big questions.py. Okay. And basically what it's done now, if I type in Flask run, it's running this Flask server, which it should do in a minute. and it's going to give you a whole bunch of information. One bit of information is going to be a URL, which you copy and you put into your browser. So here we are, and you can see that the Flask server is running. It says serving Flask app, bigquestions.py. Now this is the important bit. It says HTTP 127 da, da, da. Now let's copy and paste that. And have a note there that says Control C to quit. So if you want to quit the server, you press Control and C and it'll quit the server. Now once you've copied that, you need to open up the browser and paste that in. And this is beautiful and amazing, and it's taken us a while to get here, but now it's going to get really exciting where we're going to make beautiful websites. But you can see that whatever you typed in your Python file, which is back here, has been rendered on the HTML page. Now obviously this is not how we're actually going to do it, but this is in theory and in practice how it works. Now at the moment, if you make changes, so say I went back to this Sublime text file here and I changed it to say Big Questions website or something, and I refreshed the page, you'll see that it doesn't actually refresh automatically. You have to go back to the server, Control C, which stops it, and then run it. Now to get back a previous command, you don't have to type it out again. You can just type in the arrow key, the not the forward, but the up arrow key, and that gives you the last command that you ran. So I'm just going to run Flask run again, and then if I refresh the screen now, actually I might have to do a hard refresh to see the changes there, and I didn't save this either, so that would be rendered on the screen, but it doesn't do it automatically. Now in order for that to happen, because that's going to be very useful while using a development server, we need to just do one last thing. So let me Control C here, let me CLS to clear the screen. Just type this in. So again, if you're on a Windows machine, you type in set Flask all capital debug equals to 1. And once you've done that, it's just going to mean that you can refresh instantly and see code changes executed rather than stopping and starting the server again. Now one last thing before we start getting into the interesting things is it is convention to actually run the server in a slightly different way. So what we're going to do is just at the bottom of your Python file, if you just type in this, and this is something which you can look up. I'm not going to take the time to explain it now, it's a little complex. So if you type in this, and I'll add a note in the video to explain this concept, but if you just type debug equals true, what we're doing is the actual command that we put in the command prompt, we're hard coding it into the Py file. And if I save that, what it's now going to allow me to do is every time I want to run the page or run the server, I can just type in Python and I type in the name of my file. So bigquestions.py, and it does exactly the same thing, it runs the server. So if I now refresh, you can see it refreshes with that new code that I have. So those are the steps. You can go back to the PowerPoint, which I'll put on the screen. So here's the PowerPoint files. If you need to refresh your memory, we've got the .py file code. Remember, it's whatever you've called it. You can set the path using this command there and Flask run, but then we're going to move on from that and we're going to set debug to 1, and then actually we're going to do it, hard code it into the actual Python file so that you can just run the server by using the Python bigquestions.py command, or whatever the name of your file is. Now one last thing before we end this video, and remember in the next video we're going to actually look at making beautiful websites, not just these headings on the screen. Let's just tell you a little bit about these routes or routes. I think I'm just going to call them routes. Okay, so you can see that over here it has a backslash, and it's displaying big questions at that URL. Now you can define the root. Now, so for instance, if I typed in, I could type in another root, or define another root here by typing in this /home single, right? And what would happen if I run my server? What would happen if I run my server? It is running, so that's fine. If I type in home, it would also go to the same URL. Now the reason it's not doing it is because I've not saved it, so I'm just going to save that. And you should, yeah. So now that root home takes me to the same place. Now that's not very obvious to you what's happening, so let's make something completely new. So I'm going to type in app.root, and actually for simplicity, can I please just copy that? I'm going to copy this there. Remember your indentation in Python, which is very important. So app.root, and this time I'm going to say about, right? And it's going to say def about return. I'm going to return exactly the same thing as here, except I wanted to say about. So I'm just going to copy paste that and say about this awesome website, right? So I save this file. Remember, you must save it, and you refresh it. And actually, if I type in about, that root takes me to that, and back to home would take me to home. So you can see the beginnings of a website, how this is beginning to look, but obviously we're going to actually create HTML pages now and render them on the page. So that's a great introduction. Let's have a quick recap of everything we've done. So in this lesson, you've covered a whole bunch of stuff. You've looked at, obviously, how to download the latest version of Python, how to use command prompt, and I'd encourage you to just Google command prompt and look up the different things you can do with it. It's like magic. Once you get used to it, it's really quick and easy. You'd never go back to the old clicking visual way. You've made a folder structure. You've set up a virtual environment. Again, look that up. It's a term that you need to understand. It's used in industry a lot. You've installed Flask. You've set up a path for this quick loading and development server loading. And finally, you've really experimented with setting up roots in a Python file. So what I'd suggest is create a few more roots. Make sure you really understand how this is happening. Maybe even make a new folder, a new project, a new virtual environment. Make sure you understand the foundations before moving on to the next lesson, which is going to be really exciting, where we're going to create something much more beautiful.